Shadows of Forgotten Gods, Reconstruction of Slavic Mythology. The script was based on the work Slavic Mythology by Aleksander Brückner, published in the year 1918. Chapter 1. The Silence of the Ages. Slavic myths themselves rather belong to the realm of myth. This paradoxical statement opens the gates to a world that vanished almost irretrievably before it could be preserved in writing. Regarding certain information, that which is neither a delusion nor merely an empty repetition, one could say that it would barely fill a single printed page. While we know relatively much about cults, about temples, priests, statues, and sacrifices, especially in relation to the Palabian Slavs or Rus, a deafening silence has fallen over the myths themselves, the stories of gods and their deeds. This chasm became fertile ground for the imagination, which, abhorring a vacuum, began to fill the blank spots with fantasies. The less was known about the essence of beliefs, the more lushly pseudoscience grew around them, creating a vicious circle where daydreams replaced facts. The researcher thus faces a task resembling the work of an archaeologist who must reconstruct the shape of a lost civilization from a few salvaged crumbs. Slavic mythology resembles crowns, necklaces, and rings of gold, pearls, and precious stones that time has mercilessly crushed, broken, and torn apart. Only tiny fragments have survived, distorted by centuries of silence and misunderstanding. Reconstructing the original arrangement of these ornaments requires not only erudition, but also critical caution, so as not to mistake an authentic jewel for a later forgery. Chapter 2. Jan Długosz's God Factory. The greatest obstacle in reaching the truth about ancient beliefs is not the lack of sources, but the surplus of false ones. In the 15th century, when there was no trace left of authentic Polish myths, chroniclers, led by Jan Długosz, decided to fix this historical oversight. Having not the slightest idea about the actual pantheon of their ancestors, they created it anew, following a classical model. Długosz's Polish Olympus is in essence a literary fiction, in which native alleged deities were artificially matched to Roman gods. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, or Pluto received Slavic masks, behind which lay no ancient content. Philological analysis ruthlessly exposes this mechanism. Deities such as Jeza, Lada, Lel, and Polel, with whom Długosz populated his chronicle, never existed as objects of worship. In reality, these were refrains of ritual or wedding songs, exclamations, and chants like Leli, which were incomprehensible to the Christian chronicler, and erroneously interpreted as names of demons or gods. The situation is similar with the alleged deity of death, Nidja, fashioned after Pluto. Even such colorful figures as Jivana or Marzana belong more to botany or folkloric rites of drowning winter than to a pantheon of a higher order. This entire catalogue, later uncritically replicated by Miechowita and others, is a product of cabinet speculation, not an echo of living faith. Brückner terms this process the activity of mythologists, researchers and chroniclers who lied about mythology, often in good faith, wanting to ennoble their own culture by equipping it with a pantheon equal to the Greek one. Throwing these fabrications into the garbage heap of science is a painful but necessary hygienic procedure. Only after removing Radogost, who turned out to be the name of a stronghold, not a god, and the entire retinue of Długosz's phantasms, can one perceive the hard ground of facts. Chapter 3. Between Myth and History. Alongside the mythologists creating non-existent entities, the second half of the 19th century saw the emergence of mythophobes. These researchers, falling into the other extreme, began to deny Slavic deities their indigenous nature, tracing them massively to foreign influences, Iranian, Germanic, or Christian. According to this school, Slavs were supposed to live exclusively on loans, incapable of generating their own original religious concepts. This is skepticism taken to the absurd, which, like the naive faith in Długosz, hinders the arrival at the truth. The key to understanding the authentic mythology of the Slavs is realizing that paganism was neither a uniform nor a static system. It looked different in Rus, where testimonies about the Vladimirian pantheon survived, and different in the Palabian lands, where in the face of Christian pressure, it evolved into organized forms with powerful temples and a priestly caste. Rus sources, though late and tainted by a Christian perspective, are of fundamental value because they reach back to times when paganism was still a living political and social force. The Chronicle of Nestor, or the Tale of Igor's Campaign, preserve the names of gods which, unlike Długosz's inventions, find confirmation in linguistic and comparative analysis. Chapter 4. The Lithuanian Trace. In the search for the lost key to Slavic mysteries, the researchers' gaze must turn to the north. Lithuanians and Slavs are twins in the Indo-European family, whose languages and cultures show striking similarity. No other tribe has preserved so many common features with Proto-Slavic as Lithuania. It is precisely in Lithuanian mythology, which, due to a later baptism, survived in a more primitive and conservative form, that one can find the missing links of the Slavic belief system. Lithuania did not know an extensive temple hierarchy or statues to the same degree as the Western Slavs, which, paradoxically, allowed it to preserve beliefs in a form closer to nature and primal images. Comparing Perkunas with Perun is not just a simple phonetic juxtaposition, but proof of the existence of an ancient, common religious layer reaching back to the times of Balto-Slavic unity. Where Slavic links of the chain were broken, Lithuanian parallels allow them to be reconstructed. This analysis, however, requires precision. It is not about simple identification, but about understanding the processes of evolution that caused the same deity to remain the Lord of Oaks among Lithuanians, while among Slavs he became the ruler of thunder. Chapter 5. Critical Method. The path to reconstructing Slavic mythology leads through a thicket of etymologies and fragments of old chronicles. Every word, every place name must be X-rayed. Topographic names such as Svarogin or Perun's mountains become silent witnesses of ancient cults, often more reliable than the learned writers of the Middle Ages. Etymology, although it can be a deceptive tool, allows a skilled researcher to separate the wheat from the chaff. Understanding the Slavic sacrum requires rejecting modern categories of thinking about religion. Slavs did not build theological systems, nor did they write down dogmas. Their faith was closely untwined with the rhythm of nature and the life of the community. Gods were not abstract entities, but powerful forces with whom one had to negotiate through sacrifices and omens. Only after clearing the foreground of centuries-old layers of falsehood and overinterpretation do the contours of the true, forgotten rulers of Slavic imagination begin to emerge from the darkness of history. Chapter 6. In Search of the Supreme God. In the dense fog that shrouds the spiritual history of the Slavic lands, one shape stands out more clearly than the others. It is a powerful, commanding silhouette, inextricably intertwined with the roar of thunder and the majesty of oaks. Perun. This is the name that, alone among the Vladimirian pantheon, has withstood the test of time, not only in chronicles, but also in topographic names scattered from the Baltic to the Balkans. However, to understand the essence of this deity, it is not enough to look at 10th century Kievan Rus. One must reach deeper, into the darkness of prehistory, to the era of the Lithuanian Slavic community, where the roots of faith intertwined with the roots of trees. Research into mythology leads to surprising conclusions. Slavs and Lithuanians are twins in the Indo-European family, whose languages and beliefs show striking similarity. Philological analysis allows us to see that the Lithuanian Perkūnas, the god of thunder and storms, and the Slavic Perun are essentially one and the same figure, although time and phonetic evolution have distanced the sound of their names. Lithuanian Perkūnas retained the older, more primitive form, while Slavic Perun underwent a metamorphosis, losing the letter K in the name. This seemingly minor difference hides the key to deciphering the original nature of the deity. Chapter 7: The Secret of the Oak Ruler. Before Perun became for the Slavs the personification of the lightning strike itself, something akin to striking thunder, he likely bore the name Perkin. The etymology of this reconstructed word leads not to atmospheric phenomena, but to the earth and its flora. In ancient Indo-European languages, the root perk meant oak, the sacred royal tree, the mightiest in the forest. Latin quercus, oak, or Celtic Erkinia silva are distant relatives of this same root. Therefore, the original, common god of Lithuanians and Slavs was not simply the ruler of lightning, he was the Oak One. A deity residing in old oaks, in sacred groves, from where he sent down rains and harvests. The oak was not the god himself, but his throne, his earthly abode. Lightning struck oaks most often, which in the eyes of ancient peoples was proof of the deity's presence. Over time, however, among the Slavs, this name evolved. Under the influence of the verb prach, to strike, and the word denoting a storm phenomenon, the ancient Perkin transformed into Terin, and subsequently into Perun. The god Oak gave way to the god Thunderer, and his name merged with the name of the destructive force of nature. Chapter 8: The Norman Trace on the Dnieper. The history of the cult of Perun in Rus, however, is not merely an evolution of native beliefs. In the 10th century, in Kiev and Novgorod, this figure acquired new political meanings, becoming a state official god. This happened due to the Varangians, Scandinavian warriors who, under the leadership of the Rurikids, created the foundations of Rus statehood. These newcomers from the north worshipped Thor, the red-bearded god with a hammer, the defender of gods and men. Arriving in Slavic lands, they recognized their Thor in the native Perun. It was the Norman ducal retinue that elevated Perun to the pinnacle of the pantheon. Vladimir the Great, before accepting baptism, carried out a specific religious reform, trying to unite diverse tribal cults under the aegis of a single supreme deity. He erected a statue of Perun on a hill in Kiev, outside the ducal court, making it visible to all. This Kievan Perun, however, differed from his Swedish prototype. Thor was bearded. Vladimir's Perun had a silver head, but only a golden moustache. He was a god of warriors, a god of oath and weaponry. Chapter 9: Oath on the Sword and Armbands. The character of the Perun cult in the retinue environment is best reflected in the preserved text of Rus Byzantine treaties. When Prince Igor and his warriors swore allegiance to the agreements with the Greeks, they did not invoke abstract forces. They went to the hill where the statue of Perun stood, and there they laid down their weapons, shields, and gold armbands. They swore on their arms that if they broke their word, they would not be protected by their own shields, and their own swords would turn against them, cutting them to death. "Let them turn yellow like this gold," ran the terrible curse hanging over the perjurer. In this ceremony, northern influences are clearly visible. The laying down of bugi, armbands or rings, is a custom known from Scandinavian culture. Perun became the guarantor of military and state order. He was the god of the elite, the god of power, imposed to some extent on the common people, who, in their daily agricultural concerns, turned to other forces. When Vladimir sent his uncle Dobrynya to Novgorod to establish the cult of Perun there as well, it was a political act. An attempt to bind the northern and southern capitals with a common religious symbol. Chapter 10. Fall and Persistence in Name. The end of the official cult of Perun came suddenly and violently with the acceptance of Christianity. The same Vladimir who ordered statues to be erected ordered them to be toppled. Chronicles describe a dramatic scene. The statue of Perun was dragged by a horse's tail from the hill, beaten with sticks, not so that the god would feel pain, but to demonstrate his powerlessness and insult the demon that dwelt within him, and then thrown into the Dnieper. In Novgorod, a similar fate befell the statue by the Volkhov River. People wept, seeing the fall of their defender, but the new faith knew no mercy for old idols. It is interesting how quickly the name of Perun disappeared from the living memory of the Rus people. Folklore preserved almost no songs or legends about him, unlike other, lower deities. Only in place names, in toponyms, did the echo of his former power survive. Perin, near Novgorod, where a temple once stood, or numerous names like Perun's Mountain, Perun's Division, scattered across the Slavic lands, testify that this cult once had a range wider than just the Kievan court. Even in Poland, where sources are silent about the cult of Perun, place names and the word Piorun itself, meaning the atmospheric phenomenon, not the god, are proof of the existence of this pan-Slavic heritage. In Christian folklore, the functions of Perun were largely taken over by Saint Elijah, Ilya. It is he who rides across the sky in a fiery chariot, and the thunder is the rumble of his wheels. The people believed that Elijah chases devils and vipers with thunderbolts, continuing in a new guise the eternal struggle of the bright deity of the heavens against the forces of chaos. However, despite these transformations, the primal, raw Perun, ruler of oaks and oaths, faded into the shadows, leaving behind only a silent trace in language and geography. Chapter 11. The Sacred and Cleansing Element. If Perun ruled the firmament and violent phenomena, the daily life of the Slavs revolved in the glow of another, closer deity: fire. Fire was not merely a physical phenomenon, a tool for heating the household or cooking food. It was a living, holy being, demanding reverence and caution. One was forbidden to spit into the fire, throw impurities into it, or curse in its presence. The domestic fire, burning in the hearth, constituted the sacred center of the hut, the link between the world of humans and the world of gods. It was to the fire that requests were brought, and to the fire that small sacrifices of food were made to ensure prosperity. In this sphere of beliefs, more intimate than the state cult of Perun, a mysterious figure emerges, combining the features of a solar deity and a patron of craftsmanship. We speak of Svarog and his offspring. Research into this figure leads us into the very center of a fascinating process in which the Slavs tried to understand the cosmos through analogies to human life. If the sun is a celestial fire and the flame on the hearth is an earthly fire, there must be a kinship of blood between them. Chapter 12. The Heavenly Smith. Among the scarce written sources, a pearl is a fragment of a chronicle preserved in Rus. It is a translation of the Greek chronicle of John Malalas, to which a Rus copyist added his own invaluable insertions, trying to explain Greek myths to the reader using native concepts. In the place where the Greek wrote about Hephaestus, the divine smith, the Slav inserted a name, Svarog. This is the only trace that allows us to reconstruct the myth of the divine craftsman. According to this account, Svarog was a ruler who descended to earth to teach people smithing. Before his time, people fought with clubs and stones. He was the first to forge iron weapons for them, giving rise to technical civilization. But Svarog's role was not limited to craftsmanship. The chronicler attributes the establishment of marriage law to him. Before the era of Svarog, sexual freedom and promiscuity prevailed. It was he who ordered that one husband should have one wife, and punished adultery by throwing the offender into a fiery furnace. Here emerges the image of a civilizing god, a strict lawgiver who organizes social and technological chaos, and whose attribute and tool of punishment is fire. The etymology of the name Svarog, related to the word svar, heat, glow, but also quarrel, anger, fits perfectly with the deity of fire and smithing. He is the Slavic equivalent of the Greek Hephaestus, but devoid of his deformity and ridiculousness. Svarog is a majestic figure who, after completing the work of creation and establishing laws, retreats into the shadows, handing over power over the world to his son. Chapter 13. Son of the Sun and Giver of Riches. This offspring of Svarog bears two names which, in essence, define one divine person, Daszbog and Svarodzic. The Rus chronicler writes explicitly, "Son Tsar, son of Svarog, that is, Daszbog." This sentence is the key to understanding Slavic solar theology. Daszbog is not an abstract deity. He is the personification of the sun, the visible ruler of the day, who ensures life, warmth, and vegetation. The name Daszbog, or Dajbug, is extremely transparent. It consists of the imperative daj, give, and the noun bog, which originally meant wealth, share, or fate. Daszbog is therefore the giving god, the giver of wealth, the distributor of goods. In the imagination of agricultural peoples, the sun was the source of all abundance. It was the sun that made the grain grow and the cattle graze. In The Tale of Igor's Campaign, the Rus people are proudly called the grandchildren of Daszbog, which testifies to the extraordinary closeness and almost familial relationship of the Slavs to this deity. He was not a fearsome god like Perun, but a benevolent guardian upon whom the material existence of the entire community depended. Chapter 14. The Riddle of the I-C Suffix. The second name, Svarodzic, is a classic patronymic, a form denoting a son. Just as a panich is the son of a lord, Pan, and a krolevich is the son of a king, Krol, so Svarodzic is the son of Svarog. However, in the Slavic language and beliefs, the suffix -ic also performed a diminutive and affectionate function. Svarog could therefore be Little Svarog or Young Svarog. Here we arrive at a fascinating dualism. Not only was the sun called Svarog as the son of the sky, but above all, the earthly fire. Medieval Rus sources thunder against those who pray to fire called Svarog. The fire on the hearth was thus treated as an earthly emanation, an earthly son of the great celestial fire, Svarog. Every lighting of a bonfire was a religious act, an invocation of the deity's presence. In this view, Slavic mythology appears as a coherent and logical system. Svarog is the celestial, potential, creative fire. Długosz is the solar disk, his visible face, and Svarog is the earthly fire, the gift of gods to people. Chapter 15. Bridge over the Elbe and Dnieper. The figure of Svarog constitutes the strongest proof of the unity of beliefs of the Western and Eastern Slavs, refuting theses about their distinctness. While in Rus, Svarog was a domestic and cult fire, among the Palabian Slavs, on the Elbe and Oder, his career took a completely different turn. In the stronghold of Radagast, called Retra by the Germans, the main sanctuary of the Riddle tribe, a deity was worshipped whom the chronicler Thietmar recorded as Zuarasis, that is undoubtedly Svarog. For years researchers wandered, misled by the name of the stronghold and inventing a god named Radagast. Brückner ruthlessly deals with this error. Radagast is a place name meaning a stronghold belonging to a man named Radagast, just like Bydgoszcz. The deity residing in this stronghold was precisely Svarog. Among the Palabians, in conditions of constant wars with the Germans, this god of fire and sun acquired military features. In the temple in Retra stood his statue in a helmet and armor, and omens from a horse dedicated to the god decided on war and peace. It is remarkable that the same name resounded in the prayers of a simple peasant in Rus lighting a stove, and in a mighty temple on the Elbe, where priests in purple decided the fate of tribes. Svarog connected the Slavic lands with a clasp of fire. His cult proves that, despite political and territorial differences, the religious foundation was common. From the domestic hearth to the military banner, fire was for the Slavs an element that gave life, but, treated carelessly, could consume. In this cult, one can see respect for a power that warms, but burns. Chapter 16. The False Trail of the Cattle God. In the shadow of the thunderous Perun, in the lowlands of the Slavic imagination, lurks a figure much more mysterious and ambiguous. The Rus chronicler, recording the history of bygone years, called him Veles, the cattle god. This designation, repeated uncritically for centuries, became a label that obscured the true face of this deity for a long time. However, a penetrating critical analysis allows us to tear off this mask and perceive beneath it something far more powerful than merely a guardian of the herd. The term Skotichbog, cattle god, is most likely an invention of a monk chronicler, dictated either by a desire to degrade the pagan sacrum or by a simple linguistic misunderstanding. The key to this riddle is the Christian Saint Blaise, in Greek pronunciation Vlasios, and on Slavic ground Vlas. This saint, recognized as the patron of livestock, resembled the pagan Volos so much by name that in the minds of the people, and later the clergy, these two figures merged. The church, fighting against paganism, willingly agreed to such a degradation of the old god to the role of a herdsman. But could a god, upon whom all of Rus swore, be merely a guardian of cows and sheep? Such an interpretation contradicts the gravity with which this name was surrounded in international treaties. Veles must have been someone more. He was a power with whom princes and merchants reckoned, a force ruling a sphere that Perun did not reach. Chapter 17. Oath on Gold and Earth. The dualism of Slavic political theology is revealed most fully in the ceremonies of oaths sworn to Byzantium by the rulers of Kiev. When the Varangian retinue, the elite warriors of Norman origin, laid their hands on their swords and invoked Perun, the rest of Rus, the Slavic majority, appealed to Veles. A clear division of competencies emerges here, and perhaps even a class and ethnic division. Perun reigned on high, on the Kievan hill, in the glare of the sun and lightning. Veles had his seat below, in the Podil, in the commercial district, closer to the river and the earth. The extraction of the statue of Veles from the currents of the Pachina River by Vladimir, only to destroy it subsequently, was a symbolic act with a different significance than the toppling of Perun. Veles was not thrown down from the hill, he was always below. He was the god of wealth. In ancient times, cattle, scot, was a synonym for money and property. But above all, he was the guardian of oaths and the law. Breaking a word given on Veles threatened something worse than death by the sword. It threatened the curse of gold, that is, jaundice, the disease, and slow rotting. He is a god who binds and looses, the patron of exchange, but also of that ultimate exchange that takes place between life and death. Chapter 18. Lithuanian Shadows. To understand the dark nature of Veles, one must turn again to Lithuania, to that living open-air museum of Indo-European antiquity. The name Veles is not isolated. We find it in the Lithuanian word Veles, meaning the spirits of the dead, the shadows of ancestors. In this light, Veles ceases to be a guardian of cattle and becomes a shepherd of souls, the ruler of the underworld. It is he who gathers unnumbered herds of shadows in the meadows of the otherworld. This connection is confirmed by the Lithuanian word Velnias, meaning the devil, but in the original sense, a deity is the underground and death, later demonized by Christianity. Slavic Veles and Lithuanian Velnias are fragments of the same ancient myth about the ruler of the underworld. Etymology leads us even further, towards words denoting vision, knowledge, and perhaps greatness. Some researchers connect Veles with the Veleti, giants, which would suggest his titanic nature. He is a chthonic god, connected with the earth and what is hidden beneath it, roots, underground waters, gold, and the souls of the dead. In opposition to the Uranic celestial Perun, Veles personifies the forces of night, magic, and mystery. That is why in folklore, when Perun hurls thunderbolts, he aims them at the evil one, who hides in the roots of trees, under stones, or in the water. He aims at Veles. Chapter 19. Ruler of Nawia. The land ruled by Veles bears the name Nawia in Slavic beliefs. It is not a Christian hell full of fire and torment, although a later church tradition tried to impose such an image. Nawia is rather a misty land of shadows, a place where souls reside after leaving the world of the living. The word na means a corpse, a deceased person. Veles, as the lord of Nawia, is the one who opens the gates of the afterlife. It was to him that prayers were offered to ensure a peaceful existence for ancestors, and his wrath was feared lest the dead return as vampires or strigas. Accounts of the bathhouse for the Navi, which ancient Slavs prepared by scattering ash on the floor to see the footprints of the dead upon it, testify to a deep and concrete belief in communing with the spirit world. Veles patronized these rites. His competencies included the care of the spiritual, magical, and poetic sphere. In The Tale of Igor's Campaign, the prophetic bard Boyan is called Veles's grandson. This is an extremely important trace, suggesting that Veles was also the patron of inspiration, singers, and soothsayers, those who possessed knowledge, witches and wizards, transcending ordinary human cognition. As the god of magic and odes, he bound the community not by the force of arms, but by the force of the word and ritual. Chapter 20. Cosmic Balance. The reconstruction of Slavic mythology thus reveals a fundamental dualism, but not in the sense of a struggle between absolute good and absolute evil, as in Manichaeism or Christianity. It is a functional dualism, necessary for the persistence of the world. Perun and Veles are two sides of the same reality. Perun is the height, sky, fire, war, ducal power, the brightness of day. Veles is the depth, earth, water, peace, magic, wealth, night, and death. This balance of forces explains why, in Kiev, the statues of these deities could not stand next to each other. Their spheres of influence were separated topographically, which reflected the structure of the cosmos. The conflict between them, echoing in myths about the Thunderer's fight against the serpent, often identified with Veles, is a cosmogonic myth. The strike of lightning into the earth is a fertilizing act, but also an ordering one. It is the moment when the sky touches the underground. Veles, although pushed into the river and demonized, survived in folk culture longer than Perun. He hid under the cloak of St. Nicholas or St. Blaise in All Souls rites and in folk magic, remaining a silent but present ruler of the Slavic subconscious. Chapter 21. New Masks of Old Gods. When the gaze wanders west, towards the banks of the Elbe and the Oder, towards the island of Rügen and the cities of Pomerania, the image of Slavic faith undergoes a violent transformation. In German and Danish chronicles from the 11th and 12th centuries, in Tietmar, Adam of Bremen, Helmold, or Saxo Grammaticus, the names of Perun or Veles are no longer heard. Instead, a galaxy of deities appears with strangely sounding names ending in -vit or -glav. Svantevit, Yarovit, Rujevit, Triglav. Did the Western Slavs, separated from their Eastern brothers, create a completely separate pantheon? Aleksander Brückner shatters this illusion. He demonstrates that this new mythical suit is essentially a masquerade, the result of a dramatic historical process. In the face of a mortal threat from Christian Germany and Denmark, Elbe paganism underwent an internal reform. The old, patriarchal deities of nature and the domestic hearth had to don armor. Svarog Dashbog, the giver of sun and fire, became Svantevit, the strong lord, from the word svienti, which originally meant strong, powerful, and not sacred in the Christian sense, or Yarovit, the severe/young lord. Triglav is not a new god, but the same ruler of heaven, earth, and the underworld, named after the form of his statue. These are the same forces as in Rus, but mobilized for the final struggle for national and religious existence. Chapter 22. The Fortress of Last Hope. The center of this militant paganism became Arkona on Rügen. It was there, on a rocky promontory jutting into the Baltic, that the magnificent temple of Svantovit stood. The descriptions of chroniclers, though written by enemies, do not hide their admiration for its richness and craftsmanship. The wooden structure, carved and painted, hid within its interior a gigantic statue of a god with 4 faces, looking in 4 directions of the world. In his right hand he held a horn, which the priest filled with wine every year to divine future harvests from the level of the liquid. Unlike in Rus, where priests, Wolfs, were rather eccentric soothsayers than an organized caste, a powerful priestly hierarchy emerged on Rügen. The priest of Svantovit wore long hair and a beard, unlike the faithful who cut their hair short, and possessed power almost equal to that of the prince. The temple had its own estates, army, and treasury, fed by tributes and spoils of war. It was a state within a state, a pagan theocracy, which, in its decline, reached a peak of organizational power unknown anywhere else in the Slavic lands. Here, paganism, feeling the breath of doom on its neck, created a structure capable of resisting the pressure of the cross for centuries. Chapter 23. The Divine Horse and the Fate of War. The heart of the cult beat to the rhythm of the hooves of a sacred horse. In Arkona, a white stallion was kept, dedicated to Svantovit, on which, as it was believed, the god himself set out at night for battles against the enemies of the faith. In the morning, the horse was found sweaty and muddy, which for the people was proof of divine intervention. This animal also served for the most important divination, deciding on war and peace. The horse was led through a row of spears driven into the ground. If it passed without knocking any over, the omen was favorable. If it knocked one over, the expedition was postponed. A similar cult existed in Szczecin, where Triglav was worshipped and his black horse was kept. This military character of the deities, Svantovit with a sword, Yarovit with a shield, Rujevit with 7 faces, with 7 swords at his belt and an 8th in his hand, testifies to a deep transformation of mentality. Rustic guardians of fertility became gods of war, Slavic Marses. Even Svarozic in Radogost, Retra, donned a helmet and armor. Paganism became synonymous with independence. The worship of old gods was an act of political resistance. Chapter 24. Twilight and Survival. The end of this era came violently in the 12th century. The fall of Arkona in the year 1168, conquered by the Danish king Valdemar, was the symbolic end of organized Slavic paganism. The statue of Svantovit was toppled, chopped into pieces, and burned in camp cauldrons to cook food for the victorious soldiers. A similar fate befell the temples in Radogost and Szczecin. The gods who were supposed to protect their people proved powerless against siege engines and the new faith. However, the death of official gods did not mean the death of beliefs. Paganism, driven out of temples, went underground, into village huts, into the sphere of lower mythology. The great gods, Perun, Svarog, Svantovit, faded into oblivion or changed their names. Perun became Saint Elijah, Veles, Saint Nicholas or Blaze, and the feast of Kupala covered the ancient night of the summer solstice. Demons survived: Rusalkas, water spirits, Vodionois, house spirits, Domovois, werewolves, and vampires, Upiors. What was once great theology became superstition, folklore. A fairy tale. Chapter 25. The Legacy of Shadows. The reconstruction of Slavic mythology, performed by Brückner, reveals an image both fascinating and tragic. It is the history of a culture that developed independently, without foreign Iranian or Scandinavian influences apart from the late Rus episode, creating a rich system of beliefs based on the cult of natural forces, the sun, fire, and ancestors. It was a dynamic system capable of evolution, which, in the face of danger, was able to transform into an organized state religion. The lost world of Slavic gods did not disappear without a trace, however. It remained in the language, in words such as Bug, God, Zbože, Dola, fate, Rai, paradise, originally meaning warm lands, Niebo, heaven. It remained in folk traditions, in All Souls' rites, in the drowning of Marzanna, in the respect for bread and fire. The Slav, although he accepted Christianity, kept deep in his soul a primal bond with nature and a belief in the presence of spirits. The shadows of forgotten gods still lengthen at sunset, reminding us of times when the oak was a temple and lightning, the voice of the highest Lord.